Sell to buy. It's been a policy that served Liverpool well under Michael Edwards in the transfer window, and in the current market could well swell Jurgen Klopp's transfer budget this coming summer. Welcome to the agenda here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke. Matt Addison's here with me. Thanks for joining us, whether it be on YouTube or whether it be through our podcast feed. Coming up, we'll be assessing the crop of Liverpool loanees farmed out this season and consider which may be cultivated and sold on, and whether or not any could stay at Anfield and supplement Jurgen Klopp's first team. Matt, there's a few to consider, and it's been a policy that certainly this last season Liverpool used to their advantage, really. Likes of Marko Grujic and Harry Wilson in particular were being talked about as maybe being sold on, but eventually Liverpool loaned them out, maybe, I suppose, trying to hold their value in the transfer market before reassessing it this coming summer.
Yeah, it's obviously been a policy for Jurgen Klopp and Michael Edwards and the whole of Liverpool's recruitment team, hasn't it? We saw, obviously, Ryan Brewster, I think, is the obvious example recently of someone who's gone out on loan, really sort of shown their value and their potential value to opposition clubs. And obviously, it was Sheffield United who paid the money for him last summer, and that then funded other moves for Liverpool to make in the transfer market. And I think, without the pandemic, we'd have seen that a lot more. I think Marko Grujic, Xherdan Shaqiri probably would have moved on last summer. Obviously, Grujic has gone out on loan. We'll speak about sort of him and how he's been getting on very shortly. But yeah, it's certainly a policy that Liverpool look for. We know under FSG, they don't have as much money as some of the other clubs. They've got to be clever. And this is very much one of those ways of doing that. If you can get a player out on loan, develop him that way rather than, him making the mistakes and getting minutes for Liverpool's first team. Obviously, that increases the value. And in selected examples, Harvey Elliott being the obvious one, it's obviously a development that will mean that, next season they'll probably not have to go out and buy two forwards. I still think they'll need one, but certainly Harvey Elliott this season has proven that he could be another option in that sort of position. So it's certainly something that Liverpool have used. It's become a feature, certainly, over the last few years. And I think we will definitely see that again this summer.
It's one of those, though, to consider, isn't it? I know a lot of people don't want to hear like a new signing or the policy of selling to buy players. But if you're bringing in Harvey Elliott, we might as well start with him. We'll talk about the domestic players first, maybe, who are on loan, whether it be in the EFL or in the Premier League, and then look at those who are overseas. But it is one of those, isn't it, where if you're bringing back one player and you all of a sudden, say Jurgen Klopp has a budget of, I don't know, £30 million to spend on a forward, he's then not got to split that over two players. He's got to concentrate just on one. And Harvey Elliott has had an absolutely stellar season at Blackburn Rovers. We've seen a number of times over the last couple of years, Chelsea players going into the Championship, flourishing and coming back. Harry Wilson had a great time at Derby under Frank Lampard's tutelage, but hasn't really been able to break through that. But with Harvey Elliott, maybe being that touch younger, things might be a bit different.
Yeah, I think things definitely will be different with him. I mean, he's obviously an exceptional talent. He's only just turned 18. We know all of these things, but it's worth sort of reiterating that because, the numbers, I think it's 18 goal contributions in 39 appearances this season. It's, pretty much 1 in 2 for him, which at that age, in terms of the difficulty of the Championship, in a team which generally has underperformed compared to sort of expectations at Blackburn this season, I think that's certainly fair to say that he has been one of their standouts. I know Tony Mowbray this weekend has been singing his praises and saying essentially Blackburn should just give him the ball at every opportunity because he's got that magical touch. He can do things that, lots of other players in the Championship can't do. So, yeah, for me, I think it's pretty obvious that Harvey Elliott will do essentially what Curtis Jones did last year, which is take on the place of and the minutes of a more senior, established professional. I think we would have seen it last summer. Obviously, Curtis Jones took on the sort of squad role that Adam Lallana has. He's well exceeded that. I think he's got more than double the minutes this season than Lallana did last season. But I think we'll see a similar thing with Harvey Elliott and Xherdan Shaqiri. And I think it's no surprise. Obviously, the age is a big factor in the sort of shock from maybe people who don't know the ins and outs of it. But, last summer, I think that would have been the plan. I think Shaqiri had a price tag on his head. I think it was initially 28 million. I think Liverpool would have accepted a little bit less than that, but obviously no one came in for him. He didn't end up moving on, and in the end, Harvey Elliott sort of had to go out to get his minutes at Blackburn. But if Shaqiri had gone last season, I think we would have seen Harvey Elliott essentially do that this season. So it's just the exact same plan, but 12 months further down the line, 12 months further into his development. So I think it's certainly one of those that you'd expect him to save Liverpool money in terms of the transfer market rather than actually raise funds by any sort of sale, because it's 100% certain that he will be at Liverpool in some form next season.
Yeah, I think through the course of the season, he's really sort of nailed that down, hasn't he? I think a few people maybe early on in that loan at Blackburn maybe thought, oh, could he do another loan next season, whether it be a side really at the top end of the Championship pushing for automatic promotion, or whether it even be in the Premier League. But thus has been his form. I think a lot of people very, very excited to see him back. And I suppose one of the sort of unthought of qualities that he's had. He's been able to deal with the pressure that's been put on his shoulders. Of course, just how young he was when still 15, I think he was, when he was with Fulham for the first time in the first team away at Millwall in a Carabao Cup tie. And you see young players often, I mean, Jordan Ibe may be a real sort of example of that Harvey Elliott's maybe followed more of the Raheem Sterling route rather than Jordan Ibe in terms of coming in as a real young player and actually being able to kick on and hopefully make an impression on Jurgen Klopp's first team next season. Let's stick then with players in the Championship, and let's talk of the three other Liverpool loanees there at that level. You mentioned Xherdan Shaqiri before. Of course, he was being touted for a move last summer, as too was Harry Wilson. In the end, a move neither permanently came around, and Wilson was the one in the end sacrificed and moved on loan to Cardiff along with Sheyi Ojo and Sepp van den Berg is at Preston North End, having moved there in the winter window.
Yeah, all three of them really interesting. I think heading into the summer, we might as well start with the two lads at Cardiff. Harry Wilson is obviously the one that you'd expect to make Liverpool a bit of profit this summer and add to their transfer budget. Last summer, they wanted 20 million for him, which I think probably was just about reasonable in a normal season, excluding the pandemic and the impact of that. I think they probably would have got that. I think it was around about 16 or 17 million that Burnley put down, mainly. That sort of figure was around 12 million, I think, up front, and the rest sort of in add-ons. But that was the sort of value that they were prepared to go to. And I think there would have been other clubs as well interested in normal times. But obviously we know the knock-on effect, the economic impact of the pandemic on the transfer window sort of stopped that from taking place, really. So it's going to be an interesting summer, I think, for him. I think he does have to move on and find a permanent home. But where that will be, I'm not too sure. I mean, obviously, Liverpool are not going to get that £20 million for him. I think he's certainly a Premier League player. I think he's certainly shown that at Cardiff this season. Speaking to people at Cardiff and people who've seen him, they seem to think that he's very much, a player that they shouldn't really have been able to sign last summer. There should have been a Premier League team that had come in for him, and I'm sure there will be this summer. I think the interesting thing is maybe one or two of the teams that have been linked with Harry Wilson in the past maybe wouldn't necessarily be interested in him now, Leeds United being the obvious one of those. Obviously, Liverpool playing them tomorrow. I think we'll see that they've signed Rafinha. They've got other players in that position who are probably better. So it would be interesting to see what happens. I think Burnley would be an interesting one again. Stylistically, I'm not 100% sure that would be the best move for the player, but certainly somewhere in the Premier League would be a decent move. And I think you could reasonably expect, 10, 12 million pound fee for someone like Harry Wilson. I think that would be pretty reasonable. So I think it's one of those to watch out for at his age. And we've been saying it for a couple of years, really. He does need to go and find somewhere permanent. And I think he's done enough, certainly over the last couple of seasons, if not this season, that he is very much capable of doing that. So that's definitely one to watch out for. The other player, obviously, at Cardiff is Sheyi Ojo as well, a much forgotten man, I think, among a lot of Liverpool fans. He's not made a huge impact, I wouldn't say, at Cardiff. He's done all right. That there will be interest, from other Championship clubs, I'm sure. But it's one of those. Again, he's 23 now. He's at an age where he does need to go and find a permanent home. He's sort of switched position, I believe, and started to play a little bit more down the centre. He tended to play on the right for Liverpool's youth teams, and we saw him, I think, against Tranmere 2 seasons ago, possibly, possibly 3 seasons ago that he played in that position and did quite well. But yeah, again, I think it will be a move for him. I wouldn't have thought it would be a Premier League move, but certainly somewhere in the Championship, possibly even Cardiff. I suppose it will just come down to the fee that Liverpool can ask for him. I wouldn't expect it to be.
2 years left on his contract, doesn't he? So
yeah.
I suppose it's one of those where you probably, for a player who's been out on countless loans now, you wouldn't have thought there would be much value there for Sheyi Ojo. But this is where Michael Edwards all of a sudden puts a clause in or does some kind of negotiating that all of a sudden you see a fee and you scratch your head and think, how did he get that?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of quality and a lot of talent and a lot of potential, but I think in terms of a fee, you'd be looking maybe around 2 million. Possibly wouldn't even get that. I think it would have to be that as an absolute maximum for someone like Cardiff to come in for him. I think Mick McCarthy has essentially suggested in the last couple of weeks that they probably won't be signing him, but it's certainly one to watch out for. I'm sure there'll be other clubs in the Championship who take a look at him, and who knows if you can get a move to a lower end Championship club at his age. He's still got plenty of time to work his way back, and if he can have a couple of good seasons, there's a 10 or 15 million pound transfer fee to the Premier League possibly. So yeah, certainly that is where the sort of sell on fees and all of that sort of thing will come into it. But yeah, I wouldn't expect Ojo to make Liverpool huge amounts of money this summer, but as you say, there's still plenty of time for Michael Edwards to do something there.
Yeah, and Sepp Berg up at Preston North End, 19 years of age. Of course, his second season at Liverpool, but he's not been around the first team, but he's been being played at right back by Preston North End. A lot of people up there at Deepdale very, very sort of impressed with his attitude and the way that he has acclimatised to that new position. You'd probably suggest, Matt, another loan for him, if not maybe back to Preston North End, spend a full season there and maybe begin to start seeing him play more as a centre-half by the end of next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure you'll know far more about his time there than I do, but from what I believe and from what I understand, he's enjoying himself there. I think there's been comments from him this weekend to suggest that he'd quite like to go back there. I believe that Preston have the first option on taking him back, and on his performances so far, you'd expect that they would probably take that up if they could. I think he's again at an age where he needs to be playing regular football. We've seen Reece Williams play a fair few matches this season. They're a similar sort of age, but I think it's certainly more beneficial for someone like Berg to go to the Championship, try and develop and become a senior footballer and sort of take the next steps. I think it's possibly been a little bit of a shock for him in terms of the physicality in England, and I think the fact that he's coped so well with Championship football so far this season would suggest that he's sort of on the right path towards getting to where he needs to be. So certainly it's one to watch out for. I've seen a couple of links or sort of comparisons, say with Joe Gomez, who obviously started to play a little bit at right back and then switched to centre back. Jamie Carragher's another one who's done that in the past. I think it's certainly a good route for him to take, and I'm sure long term Liverpool would like him to be playing in the centre for Preston, but I believe they're going to be interested in another right back in the summer. I think that's pretty high on Preston's list. So you'd imagine if they do take him back, he will get that opportunity next season.
Yeah, there aren't many right back options there, but as you say, he has been doing well, and if he can follow the path set by Jamie Carragher and Joe Gomez, then he could be on for some Liverpool career and a European Cup in there as well. But anyway, let's talk about another one based in this time the Premier League before we get on to those overseas. Takumi Minamino, who linking up with Ralph Hasenhüttl at Southampton. A lot of people thought this was going to be a match made in heaven. Hasn't quite worked out that way, has it?
No, it hasn't. It's one of those that started really well. He took the goal against Chelsea absolutely brilliantly. Looked like he'd found a bit of form and a bit of confidence, which I think was to be expected under Ralph Hasenhüttl this season. I mean, if there was a manager and a club that suited Minamino in the Premier League, it absolutely had to be Southampton. But it's not quite gone as well as what they thought it probably would have done, I don't think. I think it's probably unlikely at this stage that Southampton would look to sign him on a permanent deal in the summer. I think it's a player that they would like to keep ideally. Obviously, Southampton looking to build their squad, but I think they've just got other priorities at this moment in time. I believe Theo Walcott is higher up on the transfer priority for them, which I think really sort of tells its own story. I mean, not to sort of, be critical of Walcott, but I think, the age that he's at, the career that he's had over the last couple of seasons, the fact that, he's a bigger priority for Southampton heading into the summer than 26-year-old Takumi Minamino, I think tells, its own story really. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I'm sure, Liverpool will be open to offers in the summer. I don't think he's an absolute necessity to get rid of or anything like that. I think one thing that will play into his hands that maybe Shaqiri moves on, maybe Divock Origi moves on as well. You probably would expect maybe two of those at the most to move on. You wouldn't want all three to move on and have to make a couple of signings in that area. So I think that does play into his hands. And if Liverpool do sell him, they will, of course, make a profit because they only paid £7.25 million for him. So it's certainly one to watch out for, I think. I would be surprised if he went to another Premier League club. I think if Southampton were to come in for him, then, fair enough. But otherwise, maybe someone like an RB Leipzig or somewhere like that, obviously arrived from Salzburg. They'll be well aware of him. I think possibly somewhere, maybe in Germany, maybe some sort of league elsewhere other than the Premier League might suit Minamino to go next. But yeah, again, I think it's probably equally as likely that he stays at Liverpool next season as he moves on, and it's very much in the balance now for him.
Yeah, he's still got 3 years on his contract, hasn't he? But I have to say, I'm not as certain that the profit Liverpool can make on him would be as high as it once was, certainly with the COVID market. And if he's very much an unwanted squad member at Liverpool, if that is how it does sort of transpire, if he's going to move to the continent, I'm not sure really that anything maybe much over £10 million would be sort of on offer perhaps for him. But we'll have to wait and see how that one does play out. Marko Grujic, he's another one on the list. Then he's over in Porto, had a couple of years at Hertha Berlin in the Bundesliga himself, but now he's in Porto and didn't seem at one stage he was getting all too much football, but they've obviously just been dumped out of the Champions League quarterfinal at the quarterfinal stage as Liverpool were by Chelsea Porto, and seems to be growing into that loan and getting a few admirers.
Yeah, he certainly does. I mean, again, there is a quality player in there. We know that. We've seen that from his time in the Bundesliga. I think when he was at Hertha Berlin, he was described as the best midfielder that they've had in 20 years or something by his manager at the time. So he's obviously got a lot of quality. Again, similar to Harry Wilson, Liverpool wanted £20 million for him last summer, which I don't think would have been massively unrealistic in normal times. But of course, we know that they're not going to get that for him this summer because the pandemic's impact is still there. And again, like you say, he's just not had the exact impact at Porto that Liverpool probably would have expected or would have possibly liked him to have. So, yeah, it's one of those. He certainly started the season mainly coming off the bench. I think he's only made 16 league appearances in all this season, so he's not really been a first choice. They've got two other players in that midfield. They play a sort of 4-4-2, and he doesn't quite fit into it. So it's one of those where it's maybe not quite happened. But again, Liverpool only paid $5 million for him. I think it was Jurgen Klopp's first signing, wasn't he, in that first January when he came in. So they are going to make a profit on him. But unfortunately, it's not going to be as big a profit as if they'd have managed to cash in on him last season. So they could have got 20 for Wilson, 20 for Grujic last season. I think you're probably looking at probably a grand total of 20 for the two of them this summer. Of course, there could be more loans, there could be other things, but again, similar to Wilson, it's that time of his career. He's 25 now, Marko Grujic. It's time for him to move on, find a permanent home, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the Bundesliga that he ends up, because that's where the best football of his career, certainly the best form and fitness and sort of consistency has come. So I'm sure there will be interest. It's just a case of how much can Liverpool squeeze out of him, and I suppose that will ultimately come down to which teams are in for him, how much they can pay, and just how many teams there are as well. Because I think what you want with him is to be a bidding war, really. If there's only one or two clubs in for him, it makes it a little bit more difficult for Liverpool.
Yeah, certainly. I think with him as well, and maybe with Wilson too, it's maybe the clauses that can be inserted into any deals, maybe sell on percentages and things. Obviously, with the COVID market, more than likely to affect any big transfer fees being banded about by sort of those mid-range clubs over on the continent. The final two then, another two who are both at the same loan club together, Taiwo, Awoniyi and Loris Karius, who are both playing their football at Union Berlin.
Yeah, again, it's two players that you would expect to move on. I think we've expected it for a little while now. They will generate transfer fees. Awoniyi he's doing okay. He's certainly not probably at Liverpool's level, but certainly Union Berlin seems to be impressing. We spoke to an expert over in Germany a few weeks ago, and he sort of compared him stylistically to Erling Haaland. So that's certainly a bold claim. I wouldn't expect Liverpool to make a huge amount of money on him. But
Get him back.
yeah, exactly. Or certainly sell him for the same sort of price tag.
Yeah, that would be nice.
But I would expect that to be a very small fee, to be honest. I don't think Union Berlin are in a particularly strong financial situation. I'm sure that they would probably quite like to keep him. He's been instrumental for them so far this season, but the chances of Liverpool really getting a huge fee for him probably gone. He's only got 2 years left on his contract as well, I believe. So it's probably one of those that you would expect to move on for a pretty small amount, maybe similar sort of fee to Sheyi Ojo, maybe 1 or 2 million might just be enough to do that for Liverpool. And it might again have to be a bit of creativity from Michael Edwards to get sell-on clauses and so on and so forth into that deal. Loris Karius is an interesting one as well. I think there will be interest in him. We've seen, obviously, there's been no shortage of clubs interested in taking him on loan from Liverpool since, obviously, his last Liverpool appearance. But again, his contract situation doesn't play into Liverpool's hands at all. Obviously, they haven't been keen to give him a contract extension. But what that does mean is that come the summer, he'll only have 12 months left on his deal. So, yeah, again, it's one of those that was brought in as a small fee. I think it was around 4.7 million that they paid Mainz for. So they're not going to probably make a profit on that. I would expect the fee to be smaller, but it's not going to be anything substantial in terms of a loss. So, yeah, I think Karius, it is this summer that he will move on. They'll find him a permanent home, I'm sure, or at the very least, probably send him out on loan to a club with a view to then making a permanent free transfer potentially in 2022. So, yeah, I would expect both of them to move on. I don't think either have got Liverpool futures moving forward, but the majority of the money, if they do sell all of these players that we've spoken about, that the majority of the money is going to come essentially from three of them, which is Wilson, Grujic and Minamino. So those are the three that you'd pick out in terms of generating funds for Liverpool. Certainly, the others, it's going to be nominal fees, if anything, for them this summer, I would think.
Yeah, 8 players then out on loan, 1 in Harvey Elliott, who could certainly come back and supplement Jurgen Klopp's squad. The other 7, if they are to be sold, though, could help rake up a fair amount of money for Liverpool then to go and add further enhancements to the squad. That's it from this edition of The Agenda, though. Do make sure you stick with us here on the Blood Red channel. Of course, plenty of reaction to come to Monday night's game with Leeds United at Elland Road. Of course, the Debrief Live will be with you on the Blood Red YouTube channel, as well as Jurgen Klopp's post-match reaction and the post-game podcast, wherever it is you get your audio on demand. But from myself, Guy Clarke, and Matt Addison, thanks for your time and your company. Bye for now.